Hi, my name is Imogen, and I'm going to be talking about The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. Just wanted to clarify that the book of short stories that was published in 1990 is also called The Things They Carried. In this video, I am only covering the first chapter. So the setting of this story takes place in Vietnam. It's outside of a town called Tan Khe? I'm saying it wrong. I looked it up. I tried. I'm so sorry, Vietnamese people. So the actual war took place between 1955 and 1975, whereas this section of the story with these characters only takes place between 1969 and 1971, which is interesting because Tim O'Brien was actually drafted in the Vietnam War, and he was there between 1969 and 1970. This is timely as the 45th anniversary of this war ending is right around the corner on April 30th. The war ended April 30th, 1975. So the main character in this story is Lieutenant Jimmy Cross, and the very first thing that we learn about Lieutenant Jimmy Cross is that he carries letters from a girl named Martha, who he knew before the war. So what each character chooses to carry is of the utmost relevance because they're literally defined by what they carry, and the story itself is called The Things They Carried. And these things are kind of literal and figurative as you get to know as the story goes on. But you get to know the characters based on itemized lists of what they chose to bring with them. Either weapons or food or, love letters, a Bible, and you'd get the actual amount of what each item weighed. So an example of this is the letters from Martha weighed 10 ounces. And in these letters, she details her life as a student at Mount Sebastian College in New Jersey. She likes volleyball and poetry and the beach. Her life is very simple, and she doesn't carry a ton of responsibility as far as Lieutenant Jimmy Cross is aware. So the lieutenant spends a considerable amount of his time thinking about whether or not Martha is a virgin and admiring these two pictures that she has sent him of her. One of them is a picture of her playing volleyball, and in it, she's wearing shorts, and he thinks to himself, those are definitely the legs of a virgin. When he describes the picture, he calls it an action shot and even describes her leg as being cocked, carrying her own weight. And you can see how his surroundings impact the way that he views this simple picture as more of her own little battlefield. He describes her as carrying only her own weight, which is only a little bit more than 100 pounds. So again, it shows her levity, her lightness, in comparison to him. And I think when it comes to the legs of a virgin, he's just more thinking of innocence and purity, that she doesn't have all of this responsibility and blood guilt on her hands. This juxtaposition between what Lieutenant Jimmy Cross carries and what Martha carries can even be seen in the way that Tim O'Brien chooses to use their names. The name Martha is referred to 22 times in the story, but we never even get her last name. Whereas Lieutenant Jimmy Cross is almost always referred to by his full name. The only 2 times that we see him not referred to by his entire name are times that it's Martha that's communicating via letters. She knows him as Jimmy because that was before he was Lieutenant Jimmy Cross. But then in the story, we actually get his full title 29 times. The only other time someone refers to him even simply as Jimmy Cross is Kiowa. That's a Native American Baptist who's in Alpha Company, and he says it after he sees Lieutenant Jimmy Cross crying, and he sees that he cares and he empathizes with him. So it's once we start to see his humanity a little bit more that he starts to lose his title. And then in the other stories after this, he's referred to as Jimmy again after the war, when he no longer carries this burden. The last name Cross is also of significance because, as you probably know, there's that common expression, "This is my cross to bear," talking about a responsibility. And this expression is a reference to Jesus Christ, who many believe to have died on a cross for the sins of humanity. So you see Jimmy Cross is making the sacrifice, maybe for the people back home or for people like Martha, people who don't have this horrible burden of being a soldier in this, very morally ambiguous war. So one thing that Lieutenant Jimmy Cross carried that the other men in Alpha Company did not carry was he felt responsible for the lives of the entire company because he was their leader. And I have a quote here that says, he carried a strobe light and the responsibility for the lives of his men. So this included Ted Lavender, who was shot in the head. And we see that coming up several times throughout the story. It'll be just a list of things, and then it'll say, and on April 16th, before Ted Lavender was shot, or right when Ted Lavender was shot, or it's kind of told fragmented and in different, unique ways throughout the story. We get bits and pieces. So basically what happened was the company was given the assignment of destroying these elaborate tunnels that were outside of the town of Tanque, that I know I'm saying wrong, and again, I'm so sorry. But it was a man named Lee Strunk who was going to go into the tunnel and basically, destroy them. So they were all really nervous about his life because this is a really risky job that he has to do alone. And while they're, waiting for him to come back out of the tunnel, they're all really nervous. But when he comes out, they all kind of start laughing and joking around, clearly happy that he survived. In the meantime, Ted Lavender went to go to the bathroom. And while this is all going on, Lieutenant Jimmy Cross is thinking about Martha. He's thinking about how much he loves her and whether or not she's a virgin and all of these other things that are going through this 24-year-old boy's head. And while Ted Lavender is coming back from the bathroom and they're all joking around, he gets shot in the head. So after Ted Lavender gets carried away, Lieutenant Jimmy Cross brings his men back into the town of Tanque and they basically just destroy it. They set things on fire, they even kill the animals. They seem pretty ruthless in this attack. And then afterwards, when he gets back to, their camp where they set up, he burns the pictures and letters that Martha gave him. And he vows that he would even get rid of the pebble that he had given her, that he was carrying in his mouth at the time. So some people might not connect why exactly Ted Lavender's death is related to Martha and his love for Martha, but he basically feels like because he loved Martha so much, he was distracted, and basically the weight of her love is too much for him to carry, which is something that he literally says, but his love was too much for him. It was too heavy with all of the other responsibilities and burdens that he has placed on his back. And there's this section here that I thought was really important for you to kind of understand where his head was at after Ted Lavender died. It says, he felt shame, he hated himself. He had loved Martha more than his men, and as a consequence, Lavender was now dead, and this was something he would have to carry like a stone in his stomach for the rest of the war. I think this story does a really great job at showing people like me who have never been involved in a war all of the different facets of damage that could do to the human psyche and all of the responsibilities that we don't even think about. He describes Martha as weightless, and Martha's like me. She's a college student who, has responsibility, but in comparison to these people, not much at all. And he describes her several times as being weightless and only carrying herself, her own individual name, and she has free will to do what she wants, which Lieutenant Jimmy Cross does not have because he was drafted into the war. So I thought it would be interesting throughout the story I went through and kind of grabbed snippets from all throughout this story of where Tim O'Brien says different things that they carried. And it's just so beautifully written because some of the things, are so mundane, like, cans or like bubble gum. And then you have these other things intermixed with it that are just so powerful and raw that really bring the reality of what this was like to life. So I just wanted to read them off. So what they carried was largely determined by necessity. The responsibility for the lives of his men. They carried ghosts, superstition. They carried each other, the wounded and the weak. They carried the land itself, Vietnam, the sky, gravity. They carried their own lives, their poise, a kind of dignity, the emotional baggage of men who might die. The things men carried inside, the things men did or felt they had to do. This war was so complicated, and in interviews with Tim O'Brien, you can see him trying to express that, and he just does such a great job in his work. I really think that you should read it if you want to experience what it was like in another time for people who were going through something tremendously difficult. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and check out also my review of That Evening Sun by William Faulkner. Bye!